In this lecture, we'll focus on the poem that spans Proverbs chapter 1, verses 20 to 33. This can be entitled The Appeal of Wisdom. Let's begin by considering where this particular poem fits in the flow of the larger book of Proverbs. The preceding poem operated as an intervention, and here we're talking about verses 10 to 19 of chapter 1. This intervention the sage was portraying as an intercept, launched to rescue the youth as he was about to join a murderous gang. Now as we come to verse 20 and following of chapter 1, the sage presents the counterpoint. It's another appeal. It's an opportunity for the youth to enroll in a positive set of instructions, that is, enrolling as a disciple of Lady Wisdom instead of enrolling in the murderous gang. After this poem, ending chapter 1, verse 33, the next composition assumes that the youth has been successfully persuaded to enroll as Lady Wisdom's pupil. That next poem will govern all of chapter 2. At that point, the sage impresses the youth with exactly how he ought to pursue Lady Wisdom, namely, with a great deal of initiative. And if he does so, then he will gain full benefit from the instruction that she extends. Let's begin by reading through this particular poem, beginning with chapter 1, verse 20. In the lanes, wisdom is giving a ringing cry. In the plaza, she is raising her voice. At the onset of roaring, she is calling out. At the gateways to the city, she is making her speech. How long, naive ones, will you love naivete? And how long will scoffers delight themselves with scoffing, and fools hate knowledge? May you turn to my reproof. Look, would that I might pour my spirit on you. Would that I might explain my teachings to you. Because I called out, but you refused. I stretched out my hand, but no one paid attention. Rather, you ignored my every counsel and did not accept my reproof. Likewise, for my part, I will laugh at your disaster. I will mock when your terror comes like a storm and your disaster invades like a whirlwind, when anxiety and affliction come upon you. Then they, on their part, will call out to me, but I will not answer. They, on their part, will be on the lookout for me, but will not find me. Since they hated knowledge, and the fear of the Lord they did not choose. They did not accept my counsel. They spurned my every reproof. So may they eat of the fruit of their way, and with their plans may they be sated. Surely the naive's waywardness will slay them, and the fool's complacency will destroy them. But one who listens to me will dwell securely, and will remain undisturbed by dreadful terror. This poem opens with an introduction of Lady Wisdom that spans verses 20 and 21, and then follows with her speech in 22 to 33. To get a handle on this poem, let's begin by looking at macrostructural features, that is, those features which are not isolated to a single section, our highest level of subdivision, but span more than one section. Two features join section 1, that is verses 20 and 21, with section 2, the balance of the poem. The first feature links the identification of a speaker in section 1 with the oration, the speech, that this person then actually delivers in section 2. The second macrostructure is related to the first and issues from a rising sense of anticipation that is achieved through two simultaneous dynamic progressions that the sage has woven through the 4 hemistitches of the quatrain that spans 20 and 21, that is section 1. Those dynamic progressions involve two features. First, there is a series of 4 verbs that we will find mapping out a vector of decreasing intensity and increasingly complex communication. A second is this. There are 4 locales that map a vector leading to a region of the city best suited to a rational discourse, namely the city gates. These 2 progressions, verbs that become less and less intense while at the same time hosting increasingly complex speech, and then the 4 locales leading to the city gates, those 2 progressions foster in the reader an expectation that indeed an oration will immediately follow in section 2, and that's exactly what happens. So there's a sense of a psychological macrostructure using these 2 dynamic progressions. Now, since those 2 progressions in and of themselves constitute microstructures, that is to say, the 4 locations and the 4 verbs are restricted to section 1, they'll be discussed a little bit later when we come to microstructural features. Let's move then directly to the microstructural features, beginning with Lady Wisdom's circuit, that is, the travel that she engages in verses 20 and 21. We'll focus initially on those 4 verbs that were mentioned a moment ago. Each one of these is a verb of speech, and it sets up a progression along vectors that are at once decreasingly intense, while at the same time increasingly complex as to the sort of communication that they refer to. Consider the first, giving a ringing cry. Now, this is high volume, highly intense, but you wouldn't expect to hear a full oration coming out as a ringing cry. It's rather getting people's attention. Think of, for example, if it was a cry of warning, Mayday. This would be shouted with great intensity, but not much complexity to it. Now, Lady Wisdom is not crying out Mayday at this time, but that's just analogous for a highly intense but a low complexity communication. Now, the second verb of speech, raising of the voice, and here we're still in verse 20, part B. This is a bit more complex than the previous. The third verb in the sequence involves calling out, and now we're at the first half of verse 21. Here we come to a verb that can convey a more focused address, targeting a particular audience. The fourth in the series of 4 verbs of speech involves saying. Now, this is a very simple verb, commonly occurring in the Hebrew Bible. As far as intensity goes, it's very low intensity. But the message that can be conveyed by this verb can be highly complex. Alongside these 4 verbs of speech, we find 4 expressions that signal the actual locales, the circuit along which Lady Wisdom is traveling as she extends these messages. She moves through the city from more remote zones, that is, lanes. You see reference to this in the first half of verse 20. And then she progresses to more populous regions, the markets. Eventually, she arrives at that locale that is most suited to rational discourse, the city gates. In this sequence, the third element has customarily been treated in translation like the other 3 as one more in the series of locations. And yet this term, the Hebrew is homiot, refers rather to a boisterous sound, literally roars, not a location. To achieve a location, we'd actually have to change the spelling of the Hebrew, and some propose doing this, resulting in the translation wall. But that's not the word that we find in the Hebrew Bible. So this third term seems rather to designate a noisy region, which might be a marketplace, or rather combined with the word head as it is there in Hebrew, it adds a time frame to the locale setting that's achieved in the introduction. And that is what's being conveyed by the expression at the onset of roaring, at the time frame when roaring noise begins to break out. In terms of city life, this could be the boisterous, pleasant noisiness of economic transactions, bartering perhaps, happening in a marketplace, the morning time. Lady Wisdom displays initiative, completing her circuit through remote parts of town initially, inviting the pupil candidates, and eventually reaching the place where she will in fact deliver her teaching just as the morning bustle is getting underway. A comment is in order concerning the sage's use of the metaphor presenting wisdom as a female master teacher. In doing so, the sage employs a fundamental tool of the sapiential trade. He is enhancing the hearer's ability to grasp an abstract concept, such as wisdom itself, by clothing that abstraction in concrete realities, such as portraying it as a woman. In the United States, Lady Liberty in visible fashion functions similarly, clothing an abstract concept, liberty, as a concrete reality, as she silently welcomes wayfarers to the shores of New York. Lady Wisdom is best understood as a literary device, a personification of the abstract notion of wisdom, lending to it the form of a wise woman, consistent with the female gender of the word wisdom in the Hebrew language. To infer, as some have suggested, that Lady Wisdom here somehow comprises a vestigial goddess would at once read too much and at the same time would read too little into this sophisticated device. In terms of rhetorical impact, the twin vectors of verbs, decreasing intensity and increasing cogency, along with the vectors of place and time indicators, that is, circulating from remote regions, the lanes, to a distinguished meeting place, the city gates, both of these converge to generate anticipation as we near the city gate. The attentive reader would experience an increasing sense of expectation, imagining that a significant speech is about to be unleashed. This lecture will continue in the next video.